Hello, here we are to talk about React and Redux, and in our last video we created this. Let me refresh that, right? So I created a thing that lets me create some timers. There's a timer and a B timer, or not a timer but a counter, right? And this is all working, and we fixed a couple problems. And let me talk about this warning right here. This came up in the last one, but I thought I'd just talk about this in its own video. This says, warning, each child in a list must have a unique key property. So when we create the counters in the counters class, we're looping through the array of counter objects here, and we're generating a block of JSX code to represent each counter, right? And when we have an array of JSX elements, so that's what's getting returned here. We're mapping. Map is looping through all the items in the counters array, and for each item there, we're returning one of these, right? So out of map comes a block like this, right? So we have an array of these things. And that's really great because React will render an array of JSX blocks automatically. Like, I don't have to loop through them here. The problem though is every one of these items in an array must have a unique key. And this is something to do with their virtual DOM system, right? So we have to make sure that it can keep track of all the elements, right? So we'll need to give a unique key to each one of these things. And that's pretty easy to do. You just add a key prop like this and then assign some value, okay? Generally, it's not good to use the index. They kind of recommend against that. So if the elements that you're creating all have a unique ID, you can use that unique ID here. I don't have that, and my program is so simple. I'm just going to use the ID number here. So what I'll do is I'll take this and I'll put it in here like this, and now when I refresh our unique key error is gone, right? So, and while we're here, why don't we do one more refactor, right? So that was like fixing one problem by adding a key. Another problem is the counters class is getting a little long, and we've got this big block of JSX inside this map. What would be better is if we had a component, or we broke this counter into a component. So in other words, this thing right here, would be one component, right? And then we could just duplicate that component everywhere. So let's do that. So I've got counters, which is the list of counters, and then I'll make a new file, and we'll put it in source in components, and we'll just call it counter.js. And then we should import all of our boilerplate stuff. You know what? This will just be a simple component. So we'll make this as a function, or a stateless component. And we won't need to import component, right? Oh wait, we got to get this from React, and then we'll say const counter equals some function that takes props as a parameter and returns a block of JSX, right? And we'll have to export counter as the default export, okay? So this doesn't need to connect directly to Redux, though we could connect this component to Redux, and we could just pass in the ID, and it could actually ask Redux for the data that it needs to display. But I think in this case what we'll do is I'll just cut this block out here, replace it with the counter, and I'll just pass the properties in, right? So I'm gonna cut these out. That'll give me an error, that's okay. And then over here, I'm gonna return that same block. So what I need is I need to generate a key, so I have to have an ID, and then I'll have to have the value and the name, okay? And this counters method, I'll have to have an onClick, so I'll have to have an increment and a decrement method, okay? So let's figure that out. I'll have to pass these down to props to the counter component. So what I think I'm going to do is I'll have to change this to props.value. So I'll pass in a value prop. I'll say props value name, right? And then I'll pass the index. Let's change this from I to index, and that'll be more, it'll be a little easier to relate to. Yeah, this is the index, right? And that means down here where we have the I, we'll say, props.index. Actually, maybe we can do this even better, but I'll do it like this right now. So there we go. So we'll pass all of our properties down here. So I need to pass an index, a value, a name, and increment and decrement. And since props is coming in as a parameter for a function-based component instead of a class, we'll have to remove this off of these two guys. So props no longer belongs to the class. This is just a function that takes props in as a parameter, right? Okay, we might have to fix this thing in a moment. Let's go back and set up our counters again. So what I'll want to do here is import the new counter component from, we're in the same folder here, so it'll just be from counter, right? And what I want to do is maybe I can just do this all in one line, is I want to return a counter from map. So for every counter object here, this is lowercase c and uppercase c, so they're a little different, right? So this is a counter object that has a name and a value in it and an index, right? Let's actually change this to index, right? And then we'll create a counter. So now remember, the counter object here, we're going to pass props into it, and we want to pass in an index, a value, and a name. And so over here, I want to set up, index equals, index, right? And then I want to say, value equals counter dot value, and name equals, counter dot name, right? And then I also need to take care of, so this is kind of working, but if I add a name here, let's do AAA, and then I get the AAA here. The buttons are not working, and I'm getting an error because we're not passing in the increment and decrement props, okay, which we're attaching to the on click for the button, okay? So let's take care of that next. Okay, so let me actually, it looks like I'm going to have to break this into multiple lines. So I'm going to put this in the parentheses here, and then maybe I'll separate these guys each onto their own line, and that'll kind of make that a little cleaner and easier to read. Okay, so we got all these guys. Now I need the increment, increment count. I'll set that equal to this dot props dot increment count, right? And I don't want to call the method, right? I'm just going to pass the method in here, right? And then I'll make this one decrement count. We can refactor this too later, but we'll just get it working. Oh yeah, wait, I need to have the curly braces around this guy. There we go, right? Anytime you have an expression in JSX, you need to have the curly braces. So hopefully now we'll pass these parameters or these methods, as props into the counter component. So remember, all the props are the sort of like in the HTML format. These are called attributes. So we assign them like attributes in HTML, but these are the props. So I got index, value, name, increment, and decrement count, and they come into the counter on the props object. So props index value, right? Okay, let's try it here again. So I'll do AAA. And oh great, it's working, right? So so there we go. So that was kind of a quick refactor, and it kind of works a lot better now because we can look at the counter here and just have one component, right? And we can go through a couple refactors on this. Maybe I'll save the improvements for the next video. But anyway, thanks for watching.